This is Angus King recording a Maine Veterans Voices interview on November 25th, 2024. We're talking to Bob Miller, a Navy veteran who currently lives in Millinocket, Maine. Uh, Bob, I want to start the interview by congratulating you, thanking you for your service both in the military, but also as a veteran here in Maine. I know you're not from here originally, but you overcame that disability by moving here, and we're delighted to have you. So let me begin by asking about your early life. Where were you born, and a little bit of background and how you happened to enlist in the Navy in 1941.
I was born in New York, Long Island, uh, Woodside to be exact. And I grew up in a small town called Belmore on the south shore of Long Island. And when most boys joined the Boy Scouts, I joined the Junior Naval Reserve at age 13. And I had to travel to Freeport, Long Island. And in that school gymnasium, we learned all about the Navy. And I'm not sure why I picked uh, the subject I did for aviation machinist mate, but that was a good pick. And I guess it's because I like to make airplanes out of balsa wood and then wind up the propeller with a rubber band and they would fly. So that's
I remember doing the same thing, but I never learned to make the real ones fly like you did. So you enlisted in the Navy in 1941, but it was before Pearl Harbor. What? Tell me the story of what led you to enlist at the age of 17.
Well, it starts with my parents had four girls and they wanted a boy. And that one boy came, they spoiled him rotten. And he was full of mischief, not like girls, anyhow. So my father decided that it would be the best thing for everyone if he put me in the Navy and I learned discipline. And that's how I became, at 17, he signed for me for 4 years. And that's when he signed was January 6, 1941.
So when you enlisted, we were not at war with anybody. This was there were certainly clouds on the horizon, but we weren't in World War II at that point.
That's right. We weren't. And in fact, before I went into the Navy, he had sent me to Delahanty Institute for Machinists. So in the Navy, they said, okay, after boot camp, we're going to send you to machinist school in Great Lakes. And that's how that came about.
So were you still at Great Lake in boot camp when Pearl Harbor happened?
No, I was a little upset with a chief petty officer, and I decked him. And uh, and
I call that upset.
anyhow, they put me in the brig on bread and water, fined me $10, and then sent me to sea. Because automatically, if you do anything wrong in service school, they send you to sea. So they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia for the battleship Wyoming. And that was the first ship I was on. And that was it was still in 41. So this is still before the war. Now they had me be the second loader on a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. So right away it put me into that particular way of doing things in the Navy. Now they finally transferred me to a minesweeper, the Raven. Now the Raven looked like a small destroyer. It had two 3-inch anti-aircraft guns, one facing forward and one facing to the rear, and three 50 caliber machine guns. And I ended up on one of them. But on the Raven is where I learned to be a first-class seaman. Uh, I would became a helmsman. I would steer the ship, and I would train new men how to be a helmsman. And I was a coxswain on the motor launch, and I did a lot of fancy work on the Raven.
I, I, I remember hearing that minesweepers in those days were wooden vessels. Was the Raven wooden?
No, it was a new minesweeper. In fact, two of them were built at the same time next to each other in Norfolk, Virginia, and it was all metal, and it was an AM, which is auxiliary minesweep, which goes with the fleet, and that fact it goes to wherever the minesweepers were. That's where the fleet can come in afterwards.
So where were you on December 7th, 1941?
We had just been coming back from dodging torpedoes from the German U-boats in the Atlantic and trying to protect our ships going from Panama Canal to uh, Nova Scotia. And I'm sorry, what was that
You
next question?
you were on board when you heard about Pearl
Oh,
Harbor?
yes. So we had just pulled into Norfolk, Virginia on the Raven, and they set off general quarters. And I said, somebody's going to get in big trouble doing that for my birthday. I found out it was Pearl Harbor. I never heard of Pearl Harbor because all the duty I had was in the Atlantic and the North Atlantic, and that's how I heard about World
So
War II.
so prior to that, when you were on the Raven on the minesweeper, it
Yes,
was part of protecting the North Atlantic trade from U-boats.
right. Many times they shot torpedoes at us, and we got away safe. And of course, we
So
went after them.
so how long were you aboard ship, and then when did you get back to being a mechanic?
I was on the Raven about a year, and then one day they said to me, "Pack your gear. You're getting transferred for shore duty." And I had been seasick while I was on the Raven, but I think I got over it or got to work with it. But anyhow, they transferred me to the Naval Air Station in Norfolk, Virginia.
Now, I want to take you back to the general quarters and the announcement of Pearl Harbor. Did you and your shipmates realize at the time what a big deal that was? Did you? I mean, take me back to that moment. What went through your mind?
Oh, that's a good question. When I'm not sure that I remember exactly what happened, although we heard that the Japanese were attacking Pearl Harbor, and they caught us with our pants down, and nobody was suspecting it because it was a Sunday, and they were either sleeping or doing whatever or playing ball on the docks. Nobody knew it was coming, even though it was reported, as I remember, they had new radar installed at Hawaii, and the radar picked them up, but they had a report that they were getting a squadron of B-17s from the States coming
Oh,
in. So that's what they thought it was.
and of course, the next day we were at war.
Yes.
Okay, so you're back at you're back on the you're still on the Raven. Then you're transferred shoreside. Did you resume mechanic training at that point?
That's where I started, where they were teaching us how to repair airplane engines. They learned how to take the propellers, and if a cylinder was damaged, how to replace a cylinder, or all of the different things that had to be done to keep the planes flying.
Well, I did a little research this morning, and people don't realize it, but during World War II, for every soldier in the field, there were 3 to 5 people behind them, like mechanics and food service and all of those things. So, we always see the pictures of the guys on the front line, but the kind of work you were doing was absolutely critical to keeping those airplanes in the air.
Yes, I got my hands on everything I could read and study, and I really wanted to do the best job that was possibly for someone in my position to do.
Now, after the training, what you were said you were at the air station in Norfolk. Where was your next assignment?
What they did is put me into a squadron. Uh, the squadron was VGF 28, and uh, they had to teach the pilots how to land and take off on a carrier. This was all new to them. And so what they did is they uh, they sent us out to Drivers, Virginia, which was a cornfield that they had flattened out, and with a landing signal officer. And now he would teach the pilots by signaling whether they're too high or too low, too fast or too slow, and to when he gives the cut, that they would land on the carrier. Now, of course, this cornfield was much longer than a carrier would be, uh, but they had to get the idea of when to cut their engines and when to set the plane down. And that's what we did in Drivers, Virginia.
I had a friend years ago who was a Navy pilot who told me that landing on a carrier at night is the most frightening thing he'd ever done in his life.
Not only at night, but at the beginning of daytime. And now we're not talking about a big carrier, full-size carrier. We're talking about these little things that are, I don't know if they're a third the size or smaller. And it was quite a chore for them. And we lost many planes, and I'm afraid a few pilots also in their training.
So you were at the training program. Were you then shipped out again? You said you were with a squadron. Did that mean you were out at sea?
Not yet. Um, First, they would send us to the Ranger, which was the only big carrier we had in the Atlantic, uh, and we practice on the squadron. We go on there, and the pilots would practice takeoff and landing, but we lost too many planes, so we had to go back to Drivers, Virginia, and continue being trained. And then, of course, the next ship, they sent us, they said, okay, we think you might be ready. And I think they were rushing it because they knew they had an invasion coming up and they needed us for the invasion. But anyhow, the next ship was the Charger. Now, the Charger was a small aircraft carrier. They don't come any smaller, and that's what they would use only in Chesapeake Bay, where the water is calm, and our planes would practice on that. And uh, I'm afraid our planes didn't do very well, and we had to go back to Drivers, Virginia, for more training.
Well,
Finally,
one of the things that complicates landing on a carrier is not only the small space, but the fact that if you're out at sea, it can be moving up and down 10 or 15 feet with the waves.
that's what I was going to come up with next. You hit the nail on the head. So now they said, okay, ready or not, we're going on the Charger. and that's going to take us out to sea. And sure enough, we posted all the planes on board the Charger, and we go out through the submarine nets, and uh, and we're headed out into the ocean, and it's very rough. And the bow is going up, and the bow is going down. So now our planes have to learn how to take off and land. The first plane, the the officer winds it up and sends it down the deck. But he didn't realize that by the time the plane got to the end of the deck, it went straight into the ocean. Luckily, we have a destroyer that any of our planes end up in the ocean, that they will pick up the pilot. Of course, we've lost the plane, but as long as we've got the pilot, we're okay. And so next thing that they said, okay, we have to figure it out that when the bow is high, that's when the plane should be at the end of the runway. So the next plane, they wind it up and send it down. And sure enough, it's up and away he went. And the whole crew is cheering, and they're wonderful that it worked. So now the planes are up there, and they all went up and they went great. Now it's time for them to come back down and land. Now remember, the, the stern is going up and down, the same as the bow was going up and down. So now, when the signal officer gave the cut, he was in the right spot at the right place at the right speed, and he would cut back. But just then, the stern would drop away. So instead of being 2 feet above, now it's about 6 or 7 or more. And what happened is these planes, the F-4F fighter, the landing gear just went out from underneath. And what they did is the rest of the planes they sent on ahead to Bermuda, because that's where we were headed.
Basically, they gave up on it at that point till they figured out how to make it work.
Right.
I have to tell you a funny story about one time I went out on a carrier on the George Washington out off of Norfolk, as a matter of fact. Flew out, landed on the deck with the tail hook, all was good. The captain greeted me and said, "Oh, Senator, we're going to put you in the admiral's quarters." And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And it turned out that the admiral's quarters were right under the catapult, and they were doing practice night landing. So all night it was like lying in bed underneath the train station. Uh, I'll never forget feeling really cool about being in the admiral's quarters until I found out I was going to have to listen to the catapult all night. But that's another story. So you went to Bermuda. The planes went to Bermuda, but
Yes.
ultimately, did the Charger end up as an active aircraft carrier?
No, but what we did while we were at Bermuda, it seemed that around Bermuda, the water was not rough like it was as we came through the Atlantic. So we practiced the pilots practiced takeoffs and landings, and many times on both the Ranger and the Charger, and little by little they were getting a little better. But we understand that what they since they only had the one big carrier in the Atlantic, they needed 4 more carriers to do for the invasion that was coming up, which was Africa, North Africa.
Right.
So what happened was they took 4 SO tankers and converted them to aircraft carriers. Now, the flight deck of the 4 converted tankers was much bigger than the one on the Charger, and this was great. So now 3 of these carriers are ready, but the fourth one isn't completed yet. Uh, the fourth one was the Swanee, and that was still being worked on. In fact, the workmen were still on it when the ship went out to do testing of the motors and things like that. Uh, and finally, next thing you know, uh, we heard the Swanee is here, and everybody got excited because we were waiting for the Swanee. And now the trucks took us down to the water, and we boarded the tugboat Marianne, which took us out to the Swanee, which was anchored in the bay. And
I've never heard the story before. I didn't realize. So they took these were SO Standard Oil tankers.
right,
I get well they have flat decks anyway, but they modified them and
oh,
turned them into.
yes.
I never realized that.
Yeah, and they said that if they had more that were available, they would have converted them, but they needed all the rest of them to supply fuel for the fleet as it moved along.
Okay. So did you end up being on the crew of the Swanee?
Yes, yes, we were on the Swanee, and that's where we went. We didn't know where we were going or what we were doing until we left Bermuda, because they didn't want anybody to slip and say something and word get back to uh, the enemy. So what would happen was we got on the Swanee, and then we had to work together, all the ships, so that they know what to do and when to do it, and how the flag hoist would mean execute whatever we're supposed to be doing.
And where were you headed?
Well, instead of going straight to the North Africa, we zigzagged throughout. We went way south and then way north, and uh, I think we went over close to 4,000 miles. Uh, was the trip to North Africa, and
And
we had to, well,
that in order to deceive the Germans if they
right.
spotted the ships.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, while we were doing this, uh, we ran across a Spanish ship, and we had a boarding party go on board to make sure that they didn't leak out any information to the enemy.
And this was part of the the sort of retaking of North Africa where Rommel was, as I recall.
Yes, we brought Patton and some of the ships, him and his tanks, and we divided into three sections. Uh, Patton took the southern section, and he was going to land and come up the coast to Casablanca to attack from the south. And then the other branch was from the north, and that would come down from the north to attack Casablanca and also to capture the airfield. And we were the center group. We went right into Casablanca
So
with
you
Marine.
went you went into the Mediterranean. You went through
No,
Gibraltar.
no, we were on the Atlantic,
Oh, you were on the Atlantic side.
right? We were out there in the rough water. In fact, it was a big problem knowing whether we were going to abort or whether we were going to continue, uh, because the weather was so bad that they were afraid we wouldn't be able to, the troops wouldn't be able to land on the beaches. But it seems like the very last days before we got there, it lightened up enough to where they said, okay, it's a go. We're going to go through it. And that's what happened.
What was the range of the planes that you were carrying? In other words, how far could you stand off the shore to support the attack aircraft?
I think we wanted to be over the horizon the carriers had to be over the horizon because the carrier didn't have to see where, because the planes would be up there and see.
Mhm.
So I think it was about 35 miles or so. Uh, but the the battleships and cruisers had to be in there close. Now they didn't know whether they were going to accept us or fight with us, and because it was Vichy France that that had it now, and they had all the Germans were manning the pillboxes, and it was so we didn't know what to expect. So what Roosevelt did or told us to do, we dropped pamphlets in the different languages, or were about uh, we're not here to hurt you, we're here to free you, or something like that. I have I have it in my computer, the actual slip that was
Wow.
dropped. Okay, shall I go on?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so now uh, they said in order to know whether we should start shooting or not, uh, we'll wait for them. If they fire the first shot, then we'll come over the radios, batter up. And when that was said, then we were able to shoot back at them and do the job that we were there to do.
So the signal was like in baseball, batter up.
Yep, exactly.
And what happened? Did you get that signal?
Oh yes, they fired on us first, and then of course we retaliated. But we were only hitting military places. Anything that was shooting at us, we would get, and that's what happened. Now
Oh,
these converted tankers, uh, they're really only made to escort ships, convoys, or um, to replace planes that were lost to the big ships. We weren't made to go into battle, but they didn't have any choice with us at this time because we didn't have any ships. And then the word got back that these four converted tankers did a fantastic job, unbelievable. And next thing you know, we got word from the Pacific. I want them here in the Pacific now. But we couldn't go because we're in the middle of this invasion of Africa. But once we finished and got back to the States and got our ships repaired and replenished, and next thing you know, it was Christmas Day when uh, uh, we were transferred to the Shenango. And on Christmas Day, we're going through the Panama Canal, headed to the war zone in the Pacific.
so and tell me about the action that you saw in the Pacific.
Well, the first thing we did is we got to a place called Ifedi, and we heard about they had problems uh, with the Solomon Islands. Guadalcanal was a big problem. It seems that while they were unloading ammunition and food and things to the Marines that had landed there, the Jap came with a big, tremendous force and chased our little uh, group of ships away. And now the Marines are stuck on Guadalcanal. They needed water, they needed food, they needed ammunition, they needed replacements, they needed everything. They ended up eating the Japanese food when they captured something, or I forget about all the things that happened. But now we came, which is they needed us desperately in order to bring in convoys safely to protect them from any planes that were any enemy planes that were flying and any submarines. Anyhow, so we started bringing in these convoys, which was a big relief. The Marines were getting all the things that they needed.
Now, the ship you were on in the Pacific, was
Yes.
this another one of these converted tankers, or was this a straight up aircraft carrier?
This was another one of those converted tankers. There were four of them, and they made us into one group. It was the first carrier division ever formed in the Navy.
Did all of those ships make it through these battles in the Pacific?
No, in fact, they were all hit except the Shenango. The Shenango really had a charmed life. In fact, when the kamikazes were coming, one of them was shot down, and he was shot down near the Shenango, and they sent out the whaleboat to pick him up, and he was still alive, and they brought him back, and he kept saying, "Is this a Shenango?"
Hmm.
He was
So
evidently was told that's the ship you're supposed to sink.
it must have been terrifying to realize that those kamikaze planes were headed for you uh, with no other intention than to crash into the ship.
That was their job. They were not coming back to Japan because they knew that they had to crash and die.
It was literally a suicide mission.
Yes.
So you were at Guadalcanal on the Shenango. Take us to the next action.
Well, we had to take over more of the Solomon Islands, the Reynolds and the I forget the names, but anyhow, we took over more of this Solomon Islands, and then uh, we kept bringing troops in. Oh, but what happened was uh, we the Marines had a problem with their airplanes. They had B-25 bombers that were supposed to go to Guadalcanal, but they they needed someone to get them working. So they sent me over there, and I thought they just loaned me to them to get those planes flying, which I did. I got them all flying except one, which I
And
scavenged all the
where
parts from.
where were you sent to service these planes?
Ifedi, the island of Ifedi.
Okay,
They were moving up to Guadalcanal.
but
To,
those bombers were too big for carriers, right? They were island
oh
based.
no, they weren't for the carriers. They were going to Henderson Field at Guadalcanal,
Yeah.
which had been taken by the Marines.
So your job was to get them back in the air, and it sounds like you did it.
Oh, yeah, I not only did it, but I found out uh, years later when I sent away for my service record, I found out I was transferred to the Army.
You're kidding. So you were in the army, you didn't even know it.
Right, right. But uh, but the colonel there, he took good care of me because I took care of his Piper Cub. Now, our ship also had a Piper Cub, and I couldn't figure out why. But when we got to the island of Ifedi, I could understand why, because when the ship would be anchored in the lagoon, they would need the Piper Cub to fly over to the airfields, and there were several airfields on Ifedi, and that's what the colonel also used his Piper Cub for. He would use it to visit all these fields to check on them and do whatever he had to do. Uh, should I go on?
Yeah, please. And now you were in Ifedi doing maintenance on these. Were they B-28s,
No, there would be 25s,
B-25s,
two
and
engine. Yeah.
then did you return to shipboard at some point?
Uh, Yeah, uh, there was just one point I wanted to make is that uh,
Please.
when the colonel says, "Come on, I'm going to take you up for a ride," and the plane didn't feel right for some reason. So when we got down there, I took it apart and I found out that all they had on the island was 100 octane gasoline, and Piper Cubs don't use 100 octane. And what had happened was it warped the valves. Now, if he had been flying that plane much longer, we wouldn't have a colonel. So he was very thankful to me. Now, you're right. I was transferred back after several months. I was transferred back to the Shenango, and because I understand that we were ordered back to the States. So I says, I want to go back on my ship. And they says, no, we want the army to stay here. We want you here. But anyhow, I was ordered back to the ship. And then we went back to the States. Should I continue?
Yes, please.
When we came to Hawaii, they had the music was going, the hula skirts were dancing, the people were yelling and screaming and welcome back. And it was such a welcome. You have no idea what that did to the whole crew of the Shenango. And then, of course, when we continued back to the States and we got there, and there was one person on the dock to catch our hawsers and hook them up so we could tie up. And that was very disappointing.
Where did you tie up in the States? Was that San Diego, San
Yes,
Francisco?
yes, San Diego.
And then did you return to the Pacific at that point after that home port?
No, what happened was when we got there, it seems like they're building all kinds of new ships and they're taking the nucleus. They kept some of the men, the real sailors on board the Shenango, uh, but all the rest of us were transferred out to other ships, and it was that they gave me 30 days leave, and I was report back to um, Seattle, Washington. And that's what happened. When I reported back to Seattle, Washington, uh, they, uh, they had me working on uh, rebuilding these PBYs. Uh, you know what the PBY was? It was a flying boat, two-engine flying boat that
Yeah.
they use mostly to if they're pick up any men in the water, any pilots in the water, anybody in the water, that they would come in and land and take them on board and then bring them back home safely. And also they would use it uh, throughout the Pacific and also off the coasts of the United States, uh, looking for submarines. You know, they could spot them, and I guess they had depth charges that they would drop on them. I don't know.
So all of this time, were you an engine mechanic? Was your or did you deal with everything from the engine to the landing gear? Was it, or did you?
Yeah, I did everything. It's you know, because that's what they taught us. We could do sheet metal. We could do. I couldn't do electrical, but did everything else.
And then did you eventually end up back in the Pacific, or was the rest of your duty on shore?
No such luck. The the Talagi is the next. Well, actually, I was put on two other ships. The first for training. Um, I forget the names of them offhand, but I was put on two of Kaiser's ships. These are all Kaiser's aircraft carriers now.
Yep.
And first they put us on one for training, and then we had to go to Oregon for another one for training. And then we finally realized that we're being trained for the Tulagi. And that was my next ship, the Tulagi. So here the Tulagi had to do it's what it had to do. It went to Hawaii and came back and took passengers and ships there and planes there and whatever. But next thing we knew, we were going through the Panama Canal to the East Coast. And we ended up going into Norfolk, where we were replenished and refurbished and everything gone over. And the next thing I know, we're headed for Rhode Island. Um, and
Where were you headed?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Okay.
And there we took on the Admiral Durgan. He was the captain of the uh, of the Ranger during that first invasion.
So he knew you.
Uh, yeah, well, I'm not sure he knew me, but what happened was we got to be good friends. Uh, Anyhow, we also took on a squadron that had never been made before. This squadron was not only fighter pilots, they're originally PBY pilots, but now they made them fighter pilots and they trained to be a fighter pilot. Now they were sent to out west to the Army so that they could spot for the big guns that were being shot uh, over to the enemy. And they could tell the enemy whether they're too long or too short or left or right or,
Uh,
in
they
order
were
to get better
they
shots
were
and
for
some,
artillery spotters.
right. Yes, exactly. So now we have the squadron on board and the admiral on board. Now, having the admiral meant that we were in charge of this whole operation. So now we're headed out to sea. And what happened was uh, we were headed for southern France. And I don't remember, but anyhow, to make a long story short, um, we're headed for France.
And
And
tell me approximately when this was. Was this in 42, 43?
I think it had to be 43.
So it
Um,
was pre D-Day.
oh, um, no, what happened was they had arranged or planned that D-Day and southern France would be at the same time because they couldn't get very much uh, of supplies in through uh, those cliffs on Normandy.
Yeah.
So they figured that they would get a good uh, place to land and get all their supplies in through southern France around Marseille and Toulon.
Okay.
But what happened was they didn't have enough men, they didn't have enough ships, they didn't have enough to do both at the same time. So they canceled southern France. And of course now they went into Normandy. But they're coming across France and they're in big trouble. They need supplies desperately. So now they reinvent southern France, and they gave it a different name, Dragoon. Uh, and it was England that that gave it the name Dragoon because they didn't want us to do it that way. They want us to go to Italy and come up that way. And Roosevelt said, no, this is what we're going to do because our troops our troops are in big trouble and they need supplies. So that's what we did. We came through southern France, and that was an invasion there.
Well, you've had an amazing experience, and in the few minutes left,
Uh,
you left the service in 47, is that right? And then you've had quite a career then. And tell me how you happened to come to Maine.
the wait. The Tulagi was I was on it from 43 to 45. Okay. Uh,
Yeah.
now you asked me how we ended up in Maine.
Yeah,
Um,
take me through those. We've you've described an amazing experience in World War II, and I just wondered what your life was like after you left the service and becoming a veteran, and then finally what brought you to Maine.
okay. After I come out of the service, I saw in the newspaper that Republic Aviation was hiring. So I go down there and the line is around the block. I walk up into the office and I says, I saw your ad in the paper. And he says, back of the line, buddy. And I says, no, thank you. You need me. I don't need you. And I start to walk out. They put me to work in their experimental department working on the F-103 and the 105. Now, nobody has ever heard about the 103, but everybody knows the 105. It was quite an airplane. Okay, then one day they put me on the night shift. One day going home, I decided I was passing a place called Herman's World of Sporting Goods, and I wanted to stop in it and see my friend. So I stuck my head in the office to ask where he was because he was in a hunting and fishing department and he wasn't there. And she says to me, are you here for the manager's job? And I said, yes. So for the next 25 years, I I had the best job in the world. Now, coming to Maine, I was in an assisted living in Florida, and my son came to visit me, and he said he's coming to Florida because the first 17 years I took care of him. Now it's his turn to take care of me. Now, uh, before went, he was in the Navy, by the way, on submarines. So he had bought a house in Mystic, Connecticut, and he decided that he's going to sell the house and travel uh, cross country. But I forget why. Oh, he came to Florida, by the way, and he wanted me to
Come north with him.
oh, I had a lady friend, and she was uh, in the in the assisted living with me, and she passed away. So Stephen, who is in Hawaii now, and he came to Florida, he says, uh, "I want to live in Maine," and so we came to Maine looking for a house. And we saw some beautiful homes, but he says, no, they wouldn't be good for me because they had steps and this wasn't right, or the garage was separated and I would have to go out into the weather. So he looked for a house that was specially made for me. And that's where we ended up. He found this house in Millinocket, and that's where we moved to. And we have been so happy here. It's unbelievable. No traffic. Uh,
It's a great town and a beautiful region. Well, Bob, this has been amazing to be able to have this conversation, and I really appreciate, as I say, all you've done for your country and what you did to keep those planes flying in World War II. And we're so happy that you're in Maine and in such a special region of Maine up in the Katahdin region. As you know, it's just a very special place. So thank you for your time today. And I should end this by telling our viewers that we're going to post this interview. As you know, this is going to end up at the Library of Congress on December 7th, the day memorializing Pearl Harbor, which also happens to be your birthday. And tell us how old you'll be this December 7th, Bob.
Oh, thank you.
What birthday is it for you coming up?
Oh, 101.
That's what I thought. Well, that's fantastic. It's great to meet you, and hopefully next time I'm up in the region, I'll be able to shake your hand in person. Bob Miller, thanks so much for all you've done for this country and for what you've done for Maine since you've been here. We're proud to have you among our citizens. Thank you to our viewers for joining us as well. Thanks again, Bob.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you.